I'm a little bit nervous to make this video, but if the guy I'm going to talk about can make a whole podcast episode about me, then I can make a YouTube video about him. I think it's only fair. Hey lovelings, it's me, Allison Gray. Welcome back to my channel where I talk about metaphysics, mysticism, and mental freedom, and manifestation, like today. So the story I'm going to be telling you today is about how I focused on my self-concept one time, and it incidentally or inadvertently made a total stranger fall in love with me in 3 days. So before I start, I didn't know how to accurately title this video, so I don't want anyone to feel clickbaited or whatever, so let me just say now, this isn't necessarily a step-by-step guide to getting your SP, although that can be a consequence of what happens when you focus on your self-concept using the method that I did in this video. What I found out from this experience is that when you focus on your self-concept, it can kind of create a blanket positive effect on many different areas of your life at the same time. So instead of focusing on one thing that you want with narrow tunnel vision, if you go inside and focus on a general feeling of like, wow, I'm great, lots of things start lining up, as you will understand very soon. So before I can begin this story, you're going to need a quick Vedic astrology lesson just to set the context for what happens next. So if you're a Vedic astrologer, please don't come for me. I am about to oversimplify some things just for the sake of telling the story. So you could think of Vedic astrology as being an astrological system with 27 signs. They're not really signs, they're called nakshatras, that's a whole thing, but think of it as 27 subdivisions of the zodiac wheel. Out of these 27 signs, or nakshatras, there are 13 pairs, and then one standalone nakshatra. And basically these pairs are called yoni consorts, which is a really fancy way of saying these pairs are the most sexually compatible with each other out of all the nakshatras. So Dhanishta and Purva Bhadrapada would be yoni consorts, meaning on a scale of 0 to 4 of sexual compatibility, they'd be out of 4. In Vedic astrology, I am a Shadabhisha moon, and that means my yoni consort would be Ashwini. So Shadabhisha, Ashwini are the two horses of the Vedic zodiac wheel. You could think of Shadabhisha as the tame horse and Ashwini as the wild horse. So I elaborate on this concept in my article on Vedic astrology, which you can read right here. That's a fun side quest, but for the sake of this story, all you really need to know is all my life I have been inexplicably attracted to Ashwinis before I even knew what an Ashwini was. I just kind of intuitively knew when I was in the presence of an Ashwin. And then later when I learned the Vedic astrology system, it was like, whoa, this is my type. This is my type. Like nobody turns me on like an Ashwini. So, okay, now that I've said all of that, around the time when this thing happened, I was really struggling with self-esteem. I didn't feel too hot about myself. A lot of stuff was going on in my life that just made me feel like a loser and a failure and like, you know, why even bother dreaming of all the things I want? I don't deserve it, whatever. I was having a really hard time loving myself. So then I had the bright idea to go into the perspective of an Ashwini and look at myself through the eyes of an Ashwini. I've always had this profound admiration for Ashwinis. Like, I think of them as so cool and so wily and so free and powerful and charismatic and talented, and I basically worship them. So I thought, well, if I have it in me to look at Ashwinis that way, then I have it in me to let myself be looked at that way, right? If Ashwini and Shadabhisha are consorts, then Ashwins must have the same love for me that I have for them, and so if I'm having a hard time loving myself, maybe I could have an easier time loving myself if I was looking at myself through the eyes of my consort, through the eyes of an Ashwini. So I started imagining myself in the perspective of an Ashwini man, looking at me and thinking worshipful thoughts like, whoa, Allison is so smart. Allison is so beautiful. Allison is so talented. I love the way Allison thinks. I love the way she puts words together. I just started suddenly finding it so easy to think of all these things I love about myself, and I just kept going. It felt so good as a practice. I was like, I could get used to this. So for maybe like 3 days, I hung around in that mental space of just like loving on myself as an Ashwini, admiring myself as an Ashwini. So again, no particular agenda. I wasn't trying to manifest like a person, but that's what ended up happening. So on like day 4 of this practice, I start getting a bunch of new follows on Instagram. I was just getting follow after follow after follower, and I knew that that meant that somewhere on the internet I was being talked about. This ain't my first rodeo. So, rodeo. Horses. So I just kind of waited till somebody told me what was going on, and then I started getting comments saying, I found you on Mysterious Universe podcast, Mysterious Universe podcast, Mysterious Universe podcast. I was like, okay, what is this podcast? So I went, and nothing could have prepared me for what happened in this podcast episode. It was like my inner conversation was made externalized. In fact, that is exactly, not like, it wasn't like that. That is what happened. My inner conversation was made a reality. The quiet part was said loud, so to speak. Basically, one of the hosts of this podcast discovered my writing and found himself inexplicably enamored with me and couldn't stop reading my stuff, and then came across my astrology article and discovered that he is an Ashwini. And then he had this realization that like, oh, maybe I like her because I'm an Ashwin and she's a Shadabhisha and I'm her Yoni consort. Like, this whole thing played out like basically exactly as my own line of thinking had played out 3 days prior.
Yeah. But I was thinking about that because I was on my usual browsing of cute brown girl occult feminist Substack today.
Which is what?
It's my favorite genre of Substack is like cute brown girl occult feminist.
Are you drunk? What are you talking about?
Based occult lesbian feminist. That's my jam now.
I'm not surprised in the least, actually.
And I found this amazing post from my new favorite writer, who I'm totally obsessed with and possibly in love with, Alison Gray. And forget the porn is beautiful post. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a post that she had in late January. We used to build cathedrals. What happened to us? And when I finally got to the end of this great blog from Alison Gray over at alisongray.substack.com, this is when I knew that I am in love with this woman. And there's something special about her. And I think that we are a nakshatra match. I think I'm feeling her like nakshatra connection through the podcast right now, because at the end of the Substack, she said, look, I learned all of this during the most mystical experience of my life when I activated a stargate inside my body, and in doing so was able to travel the cosmos from within my inner world. I'm like, wow.
Over the course of this podcast episode, he just complimented the fuck out of me and had all these nice things to say, all the same things I had been saying internally about myself through an Ashwini's eyes for 3 days. So it's so interesting to me how when I reached a place of genuinely loving myself and genuinely finding all those things about myself amazing and lovable, suddenly here comes this character in the dream of life to reflect, to echo back to me what I had genuinely been saying about myself internally. Nothing is hidden, everybody's you, etc., etc. So I think it's so cool that without any particular agenda, just by focusing on self-love, I not only got this hot Ashwin guy to like proclaim his love for me and make a whole podcast episode about me on their successful podcast without any effort on my part, but I also got a bunch of new followers out of it. I think I got 100 total new followers specifically from that episode, which, I don't know, might not seem like a lot to you guys, but like, I'm still a relatively small creator. Actually, let me rephrase that. I'm an ever-growing creator in the online space, and I appreciate the uptick, the upsurge in followers that I got from all that loving attention on Mysterious Universe podcast. Take whatever you will out of that lesson. If you focus on self-love, you can get more social media followers. You can get attention from the opposite sex or the same sex, whatever you're into. You can get more money, you can get this, you can get that. Like, it all starts with whether you believe you deserve that kind of love lavished upon you. And if your aspiration is just to cultivate more self-love, then there you go, that's how you do it. If you're having a hard time loving yourself, imagine yourself as your lover looking at you and see yourself through eyes of love. It'll do wonders for your self-esteem, I promise. I have never been the same since this podcast thing happened. I'm feeling myself. So that's pretty much the story. Thanks so much for watching, lovelings. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't, but I'm sure you have. And let me know in the comments what kind of content you want to see in the near future. We're coming up on a new year. Do you guys want to hear more paranormal story times, manifestation story times? I don't know. Just start requesting stuff. Let's see what sticks. Let's see what resonates. And I've got a Substack. I've got an Instagram. I've got this YouTube. I've got Twitter and Facebook and all the things. You can find it all on my website, allison-gray.com. And okay, good night. I love you.